What's up? Welcome to the Existential Stoic podcast. Do you wish you were free? Do you feel free or think you're free? I mean, do you feel like everything you do in your day is your decision, your choice, not influenced by anything else? Well, you're lucky then. Today we're going to talk about existentialism and living free. How existentialism, I think, can help us actually live free and live our own authentic lives. I'm Danny, here, my buddy Randy. What's up, Randy?
Yo, Danny.
Yeah, this is interesting. So, I mean, I think existentialism has a lot to show us for how to live without being like influenced by other beliefs out there in the world that might otherwise sort of dictate how we live our lives and, how we mold our lives.
Absolutely. So I think kind of starting with a brief primer of existentialism, because this is something that came out of a period where people were not free and
Yeah.
where they saw insane atrocities, right?
Well, yeah, so a lot of existentialist people know of, like Sartre and Camus and stuff, were writing right after World War II was a lot of their stuff. So they saw, yeah, I mean, people at their worst, following orders, right, seemingly blindly doing horrific atrocities, people kind of going along with the flow because they were scared, things like that. And so freedom became really central. And also, questioning like, reason and beliefs because it was these beliefs that led to this thing and stuff. I think a big part of it is that history. And then earlier in that, if you look at like some of the fathers of like Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, you see really a reaction against like traditional Western philosophy that was putting reason on a pedestal and looking for objective truths. And they really rejected that idea of objective truth. And instead, we're looking for what matters to me the most, like subjective truths as being the key thing. Kierkegaard says, I think in either or he says something along the lines of like, what's important is I need to find uh what's true for me, what belief I'm willing to live or die for, essentially. So like, what is the subjective belief that's going to be the sort of center of my life, essentially?
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because this whole, I guess, the older Western thought of like rational beings on a
Yeah.
pedestal. How many of us have actually ever been rational? We're like
Yeah.
emotional, we're emotional creatures that think we're rational. And
Yeah.
so it's like it's crazy to think that. But what I really like about the existentialist is the idea of a subjective experience and actually like living life. Like I think The Stranger was a great book in terms
Oh
of
yeah.
that. And I think Zorba the Greek, I mean, he was a guy who lived life, and
Oh
he's
yeah.
not a philosopher or anything, but I would imagine he has this whole like subjective experience of living life. He would have been an existentialist, probably.
Probably. The thing I like about it too is like, it's like we get caught up in like we have so many things telling us how to think. We have all these norms, etiquettes, social pressures, family, society, all the stuff that we didn't agree to. We didn't, it's like we default fall into a system, right? Because you're born somewhere, you don't decide where, and you just like, you're a consequence of those norms, values, whatever that you're born into. And all of that creates constraints on you and limits you. How people think of you, how society thinks of you, how you think of yourself, all that collectively limits you. It forces you to live a certain life or to conform to certain norms and values to like fit in all of that. And what you end up doing is living somebody else's idea of a good life or some idea of a good life that's abstracted and not really about a person. All these, I think that was one of the problems with like Western philosophy that these experts criticizing was like all these philosophers looking for objective norms and objective definitions of humanity. And they saw that that really is flawed. It's a construct. We make all this stuff up and we believe it, and then it becomes real, and then it has a real impact on our lives.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think dealing with tragedy can almost be, I think, a way into existentialism because you just see the absurdity of life. Like
Oh yeah.
I know someone who just had a very close experience with someone who was murdered, and it was I can't even imagine what it was like for them. When I heard about this, it was exceptionally shocking to me. So like I can't even begin to fathom what it's like for them. Uh, and it's just like my world was rocked. I can tell
Yeah.
their world was rocked. And
Oh
like
yeah.
you can only imagine for the family of the person who was murdered, like all that stuff makes you wonder like how absurd life is.
That's a good example though too, because when things like that happen, we look for reasons, but there's no reasons. Like Camus said, we ask the universe for answers and it stays silent, right? So whenever anything like happens like that, we look for reasons. It feels unfair. we're powerless in that situation, and it's absurd. It is absurd. Like, how are we going to explain this? There's no explanation. It's something terrible that happened, and I think that's what's interesting is like we try to fit everything into a box, but once you break that box, sometimes that's when you find freedom, right? Because that's when you find that it's absurd and that the box could be anything. It doesn't have to be the way you thought it was, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the idea of freedom, I like that you kind of mix that with existentialism, because really the only freedom that we have exists in this moment here. So it's not some like rational conception of what it could be, but it's actually like the freedom in this moment here. Like Marcus Aurelius, I was listening to him this morning. Now he's not an existentialist, but he was saying like the only thing that anyone can ever lose is the present. Whether you die today, whether you die 300 years from today, the only thing you lose is the present. So like, and it's actually in that present where you have your freedom, because you have the freedom how to respond to situations, what to do, what thoughts to have about things, how to feel about things. And even though it seems like you may not have these things, like something terrible happened to me, I need to feel this way. Well, there's an incident and then there's a response to it. So there is, if the more skillful you get, you can actually find a gap between the two and decide how you can respond.
No, I think you're right, right? Our power, and I think that's what I love about existentialism is for existentialists, our power lies in our ability to interpret reality in different ways. And most of us don't use it, right? We rely on other interpretations. We rely on other people to tell us how it is, right? We let our beliefs that other people have given to us dictate how we see the world. But in reality, we can interpret it however we want. And that's where our real power lies, and that's where our real freedom lies, because you can change any situation by changing the meaning, right? And by understanding it differently. But it is difficult because it means you have to kind of like to do it and have that freedom, you have to stand on the outside. You have to be willing to kind of define your own beliefs, find your own meaning. And that's really hard, for a lot of people because you find resistance.
Yeah, so like this whole concept of how to disengage from like social norms, from social media, from all this stuff, because there's always a narrative. It's like the
Yeah.
cancel
Oh, yeah.
culture, the Me Too movement, the this, the that. And I'm not saying bad things about any of those, because then people just like blah 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 and whatever. But here's the thing, like you're just following a movement, And it's great. It feels wonderful to hop
Oh,
on the
yeah.
bandwagon. But what could you actually make of your life if you lived for yourself as opposed to just following the next bandwagon?
What about politics, right? I mean, in the US, it's comical, right? You have two parties that everybody feels like the other ones are worthless, so they have to identify with one or the other, and then they adopt all the values of the group that they're identifying with and think they have to defend it, which makes them, instead of having your own views and your own values and your own interpretation of the situation, you end up with, some amalgam of whatever this system says you should think, right? It's funny, Nietzsche had a great term for it. He said, all of us start out as bound spirits. And I like that idea as bound because you're bound to a system, to a community, to beliefs, to a certain way of thinking, a certain narrative. And some people can free themselves. So that freedom is the free spirit's the one who's on the other side of that, right? You've broken free of those constraints and you can live free. It's very difficult, but you can. And I think that I really like that notion because it's like when you're bound, you're not living your own life and you're not free because the decision you think you're making free decisions, but you're just choosing things that, you think are right based on other people's ideas. We can go back to our own lives, right? You talked about numerous times, like, before when you were doing what you thought was right based on your parental expectations, societal expectations. I did the same thing, right? Going to college for a certain degree, trying to like, look good on paper and all this, and then you find out you're unhappy because you're not living, the life that you want. Instead, you're living somebody else's idea of a good life.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely not fulfilling at all to do what other people want you to do. But it seems like it will be. So like
Yes.
everybody,
Yeah,
I
it does.
mean, so like here's an example. I talk about disengaging from social media. And I still have yet to see a study that says that social media improves your life. Like pretty much everything I've ever seen says it just wrecks you, like
Yeah.
ravages your soul. You'll get more depressed, your higher chance for suicide. You don't have friends, like all these things. It destroys your life. And yet people are like, I need to stay up to date. Like,
Yeah.
just let me scroll a little bit more. And So like on social media, there's this whole thing about, living your best life and be an entrepreneur, be a CEO, be a multi-billionaire, do all this stuff. And it's just like, why?
Yeah.
Like I think for most people, they have to go down that road and they have to do it to get to that. It's like anyone with a drug problem, basically, in order for it to turn around, they need to hit bottom. I think the same
It
exact
has to be a
thing.
real problem, right? You have to recognize the problem yourself. That's the problem. It's
Yeah,
effectively
I
the
think
issue.
I think it's the same thing for social media. All these people who think they need money, they need cars, they need status, they need whatever. I think they need to hit bottom in that way, get all of it, and then realize they're miserable. Because I have met a whole bunch of guys who did that type of thing where they went and they were the influencer, they made millions, they did all this stuff, and then they were super depressed, wanted to commit suicide, ended up doing a bunch of psychedelics, and then now they're trying to piece their life back together.
Yeah,
Because like,
that's about
yeah,
right.
yeah,
Yeah. It's funny though, but it makes sense, right? Because it's like, we don't realize, and I think, it's funny, like when Nietzsche came up with that idea of balanced spirit, he said, like, he makes the point, he says it's easier to live that way. It is way easier to conform than to live your own life. And it's simple reasoning, right? If I conform to society's norms, values, and standards, I can validate my existence and how I'm doing externally. I can look at others and say, oh, they believe the same thing, therefore I'm right. Or I can look at others and say, oh, I must be doing well because I have all this stuff on paper that says I'm doing well. So I must be doing well. So the problem's not that I'm not doing well, it's something else, right? And like we make these mistakes in judgment because we think we're actually free, but we're not. We're not making decisions ourselves. We're not living our own life. We're not living the life that's right for us. And it's not, I mean, again, it's not easy. And I think you're right. Like figuring this out sometimes takes a shocking moment because sometimes that helps us see how absurd and ridiculous it all is. And like that was Camus' idea too. Seeing that absurdity, like we all become aware of it and that we just got to not hide from it and actually face it.
yeah. It's interesting that the things that we use to judge people are the least reliable things for
Yeah.
how good of a person is, how developed of a person is. So like we look at things like cars or like money or like penis size or whatever it is, these things that are super easy to measure that have no actual bearing on the
Yeah.
person
Yeah.
other than that they have a larger amount of this one thing.
Well, that's why, money became so easy and also the display of wealth, right? So buying things because it's everybody can look at it and everybody knows the system. They're all using the same calculation, right? Like I know that car costs X amount of dollars on the market. So we're all using the same system and it becomes easy to do. But yeah, you're right. It doesn't tell us anything. It doesn't tell us about the person, doesn't tell us how they're doing, it doesn't tell us how they did it, doesn't tell us if they're depressed, happy, sad, whatever, it tells us nothing. It's ridiculous. If they're good or terrible, they could be total assholes, and then you're putting them up on a pedestal just because they have money. Like it's absurd.
Yeah. So how does someone use existentialism to become free if they're not?
I think one of the greatest things in existentialism that it tells us is, all the existentialists were reacting against the system that put reason on a pedestal, like we said. And so one of the principal things in existentialism is the rejection of objective truth. Like truth in a capital T sense, right? That like there are things, because philosophy for a long time and people for pretty much all of history, were looking for ways to define things absolutely. This is good, this is bad, or evil, or whatever, right? This is, something, this is not, whatever. So they wanted to define these beliefs as absolute. And you see that lead to situations like, the church killing people who don't believe so that everyone believes the same thing, right? It leads to kind of crazy consequences. Um, and I think that recognition is fundamental to it that, if there is no objective truth, if all these systems are made up, that frees us completely to interpret things however we want. That's the real free. It's scary. It is scary and it leads, it can lead to nihilism and stuff and like loss of belief, but it can also be very freeing because you realize that it's plastic. How I see the world doesn't have to be determined by anything.
Yeah. I really like nowadays how, like back in the day, there was religion that was like truth with the capital T. Now
Yeah.
it's science that's truth with the capital T. Like people think if it's not science, it doesn't mean anything. Like for instance, I went and I got acupuncture last week, and I was
Yeah.
talking with someone afterwards, and he's like, is that, I mean, how does that work? That's not even real medicine. And I was like, I was
They've been
like,
doing it
hang
for
on,
thousands
dude.
of years.
I know, hang on. They've been doing it for thousands of years in China, like way longer than any Western medicine. And like, what's the track record for a lot of Western medicine anyway? So it's just it's just funny how people think that anything science is that's the gospel. You know, that's the
You know
new
what's funny
gospel,
though?
science.
I'm
Yeah.
glad you mentioned that because that was one of the things I think that's interesting is, a lot of these philosophers realize that when you get to a situation where like something that used to be the truth no longer has that weight. In Western culture, I would say that's religion. It used to be the case that that was a capital T, and now it's not. Something will inevitably fill the place, and science has. And it's just as problematic as when religion held that place because you start thinking of it incorrectly. You look at it dogmatically, right? As a system that has all the answers that can tell us everything, when in fact it's just an interpretation of reality. Also, it's a construct. And yes, it can be very valuable. It can have a lot of good uses. It can have a lot of practical value and practical implications, but don't mistake it for being the truth. And I think this is like the problem that existentialists really like hone in on, which is, people do this all the time. They just put something there because they want to have those walls, those secure walls, and that comfort of security instead of really examining the world and understanding what's going on. And
Yeah.
I think, a big part of it too, and a lot of these philosophers too, like, you see it in Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor is a very good example of this, but you see it elsewhere too. This idea that, for many of us, the idea of really being free, of really being like absolutely, absolutely free in the strict sense is hard to deal with. We'd rather somebody else make the decisions for us because then we're not responsible. And this is where you get like the victimization, blame, all of that. It comes from this desire to really not want to accept our freedom because we're afraid. Because if I'm free and if it's my decision to interpret the world how I want, if I mess up, it's on me. Instead of being somebody else's problem, I can't blame society. I can't blame my family. I can't blame this or that. Now it's just my fault. And that's terrifying. So people tend to stay in these systems that don't work for them because they'd rather have somebody to blame instead of really being honestly in control of their lives.
Yeah, yeah, and it's terrifying too because you have no, oftentimes when you're free, you have no bearing. You're out of your
Nope.
comfort zone.
Yeah.
You have no idea what's going on. It's touch and go. You're playing by the seat of your pants, and it is just terrifying. And you're like, put me back in my little box. I
Yeah.
hated it there, but at least I knew where I was.
Well, this is that's what's funny. Like Camus calls it philosophical suicide, right? When people recognize like the absurdity and they're on that brink of realizing that, it's truth whatever we make it, or from whatever perspective you want to look at it from. And they get so scared because they have no answers that they go back to some old belief system in order to find that comfort, right? And they go back to some model of truth with a capital T. And Nietzsche makes the same point. He says, when you first find that freedom, like as a free spirit, the temptation is to go back. Because, like you said, you have no answers, ups, down, lefts, right. Everything's a mess. You're asking questions about everything. There's no certainty. And we like those caves. We like those secure walls around us. And I think this is the really hard thing you have to struggle with to like really be free is to realize that like meaning's plastic. We're meaning makers. We create meaning all the time. So you have to find a way to do that yourself that works for you and also recognize that even the meanings you create are not going to be permanent. They're going to be work for you for a time.
Yeah, I think it's really important to work at something that you've always wanted to do but didn't believe you could. So like I
Yeah.
remember Les Brown, the motivational speaker, he was saying one time, he's like, what I'm doing now, I could have been doing years ago, but it was because I didn't believe in myself. I didn't believe I could do it.
Yeah.
And so like I had that experience when I was becoming a veterinarian because before you're a veterinarian, when you're working in veterinary clinics, there's the veterinarian, and then you're basically cleaning shit out of a dog's kennel. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, they're the messiah. And then you go to vet school, and it's like you're learning it and you're learning it, and then all of a sudden you're just doing it on a regular enough basis, and all of a sudden you're that messiah.
Yeah.
You're the veterinarian. But it's like for me, that wasn't really it because I loved animals, but it wasn't like I was destined to be a
A
vegetarian.
vegetarian.
Yeah. I wasn't destined to be that either, but I wasn't, it wasn't like my thing. But for me, what I'm doing now, that's what I've always wanted to do. And it's just like, but it was something that I could never do. It was outside of my wheelhouse. It was outside the realm of possibility. It was outside of like, it's just not possible. Like people who do that, they're on the next level. They're born somehow special, not for me. And then you just keep doing it and doing it and doing it. and you just get closer and closer and closer, and then all of a sudden it becomes possible, and it's just like, oh my goodness, like this could actually work. Holy cow.
Well, this is what I like about existentialism, right? Which is like, you know, there's the core belief there in authenticity that everybody can do anything. Really, anybody's capable of doing anything, especially anything somebody else has done. I mean, there's always that possibility. Now, granted, it takes time, it takes effort, and all you have to want to do it. But I think we limit ourselves so much. And a lot of that comes from these beliefs that we're not good enough, that we can't do it, that we're not smart enough, that we're not whatever. And a lot of that is also tied to these beliefs that we've sort of internalized from society, from others, from our community, from the ways people look at us or think about us. And so, and from, ideas of like what success is and all that we've been given by our society and all. And I think that's one of the greatest freedoms you can get is once you realize it's all a construct and made up, you free yourself to start freeing yourself from those limiting beliefs. It's not easy because those beliefs are deep. They're really hard to get by. And like there is a lot of fear and like, a lot of, I think in some cases, pain associated with it. But once you start realizing that they're faulty and not even real, they're just an idea you have, you can start breaking them down quickly and start moving beyond them, I think. And that's really where it's cool because you can do anything, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think it's really interesting the concept of freedom. So it's like, I'm not going to say that I've done psychedelics, but from what I've heard, the experience,
Yeah.
the experience is that literally you realize you're enlightened right here, right now. And it's like, that's the freedom, is this idea that, I'll have freedom in 5 years after I do this and that and the other thing. Well, if you're always putting off this freedom, it's just never going to happen because it's always going to be in the future. The future never
Right.
arrives. You only ever are right here, right now. But if you can start looking, where am I free right here? Where am I free right now? And start seeing the freedoms that you have right here and right now, then that'll definitely open up, especially as you progress.
Yeah. No, I like that too, because it makes sense, right? You kind of create new opportunities for yourself that way, right? By seeing that, you can do anything. You're not limited by these beliefs. And they are hard to get over, though. Sometimes you have to sit with them, sometimes you have to really face it, and it's difficult. And, I think the other side of it too is, and I think a lot of people have done anything outside the norm have experienced this. When you start to act authentically or for yourself, people start judging you too. And a lot of time, partially because you're not operating within their system anymore. So you might get like, blowback from your family because how could you do that? How could you abandon this career that was so good or whatever for something else, right? For something that may or may not work. Or, from people thinking you're ridiculous. Because I think a lot of times it's jealousy, though. They wish they could do that on their own, but they can't, or they're not unable to because they haven't faced their own limitations. And instead, they see you doing it and they get upset by it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the other things too, I think that can really help with that too is, like a lot of the existentialists are atheists, so they don't believe in obviously they don't believe in capital truth B, right? They don't believe in religion, although there are some exceptions. But what's interesting is a lot of them think, as Camus was especially, I think pointing on this issue, but we live our lives and we die, and we get this one life. And if there is no meaning or purpose in life, no grand meaning or purpose that defines everybody's meaning or purpose, then we have to create it ourselves. And that can be scary, right? Because, if there's nothing after this, but it's also really freeing because you realize that no matter what I do, we all end in the same place. No matter how much I have, it all goes away when I die. You know, there's nothing anybody can really do to me. And that means if I only have this one chance to do and live life and experience life, I should make the most of it because it's up to me, right? It's not up to anybody else. It's not up to, there's no barriers preventing me. If I want it, I can go do it. I think there's a lot of freedom in that too, in that idea that, we can make this world whatever we want. We just have to be willing to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because like it or not, at the end, we're all going to die.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter.
Yeah. They say don't take life too seriously. None of us are getting out of it alive.
No, we're not. No, we're not.
But it's the craziest thing because it's so like the root of existentialism is existence, correct? Kind
I
of
think so, yeah. Yeah.
exist. Yeah.
Yeah.
So and it's like the craziest thing is none of us are going to exist in 100 years.
Yeah.
But the the actual realization that we're going to die is so far from our current experience that it almost seems impossible. It seems like, oh no, no, that'll never happen.
Well, we only know being alive, right? It's all we
Yeah.
know. So it's like,
Mm.
and before we were born, it's like that's a blank space. So it's like, it's all we know. So it is hard to wrap your head around, I think, that concept. Like we see death, obviously, we know death happens, we're aware of it. And I think that's a big factor too, and that's why you got to accept it because facing death is also important in existentialism, I think, because it gives you that sense of the value of existence, right? If it's not forever, if it's not, it has real value because it's short, because you get this one shot, because you can do with it what you want. It has meaning because it's your life. And I really like that about it too, is they bring it back to the individual, which is important, I think, and looking at value that way. So that helps too. Yeah, I think it is. It's interesting.
Hmm.
Let's say
Quite a conundrum.
it is, right? Life's interesting though. It
Hmm.
is. Oh, the other side of it too that could be really helpful too, I think, and this comes from I think particularly Nietzsche, but other exercises, affirmation too, like affirming life. Actually being able to say yes to it and say yes to like the life you're living. And I think that's a good way to think too of like, if you're living freely, like, is this a life I really accept? Can I say yes to it? Am I happy? Is there anything in my life that makes it valuable or worth doing? You know, um, Asking yourself difficult questions about like your actual state of happiness, what you're doing, your values. These are all tied, I think, centrally to existentialism and living authentically.
Mm. Yeah. I was reminded this week of my grandmother. She always used to say, and it used to piss me off when I was a kid, but bad things would happen. I would be like, why did this happen? And she'd be like, well, that's what makes life interesting. And I hated that response because I'd be like, no, that's what makes life suck. Like,
Yeah, it should
but
be
it's like,
awesome all the time.
yeah, but like she used to say this to me when she was in her 70s and her 80s. And I can kind of, as I'm getting older, I can almost start to see that perspective where like if things were going good all the time, it really wouldn't be that interesting. And like, yeah, sure, this stuff sucks, and sure, it's really terrible, and it's hard to go through, and you're doing stuff you don't want to do, and it's uncomfortable. But it's like if you were dead for 100 years and then you were given the opportunity to go through this suffering, like, wouldn't you be thrilled to do that? And
Yeah,
it's just these things that like we take for granted because we see them so often or because they occur. But if we didn't have this opportunity, and I think Alan Watts once talked about this, how we are all like, this is just kind of like a brain exercise, but like if we were all gods and we could do whatever we wanted, we would experience everything possible in the world, and then we would kind of get bored with it, and
yeah.
then we would be like, well, why don't we just take away our memory and pretend like this is the first time doing it? And then we would have to go through all these trials and tribulations as if we had never done it before. That would be exciting. And it's like,
Yeah.
hang on, that's where we are right now.
Well, if you think about it too, I think this is one of the interesting things as well, which is like for a lot of the existentialists too, like, life is valuable in itself and the struggles and stuff are all a means to overcome ourselves. It's to recognize, what am I capable of? What can I get through? And it's funny, but a lot of times we're so quick to run away from any type of suffering or pain that we never really experience it. And you never know later on, a lot of times we end up reinterpreting it anyway as a good experience. Like most people, when they go through something hard, they look back on it later as good because it helped them find direction in their life. It helped them realize what was really important. It helped them cut out the noise and live their own lives. And I think it's those people you always hear talk, speak praises about these horrible situations they went through because they got the benefit of it, of overcoming some part of themselves and freeing themselves a little bit from that difficult experience. And it's like we talk about all the time. Like most of the things we want to do are going to be hard, but when you start to do them, you realize you can, and then you realize what you're capable of too. So there is value in it. I think there's also suffering doesn't have to be a bad thing. It can be a good thing. It can be a positive.
Yeah. It's the coolest thing that, you can just you can keep going at something, even if you screw up, even if you fail, even if you can't complete it. Like there's this book that I'm reading again for the second time because the first time I gave up. I just couldn't comprehend it. And this time I'm reading it through, and it's been a couple of years, but I've learned other stuff in the meantime, and now I'm reading this book again, and it makes more sense. And it's
Yeah,
just like it's crazy because had you have asked me back then, I was so frustrated with the book, like I rage quit the book, and I was like, "Oh, I'll never get this." And it's like it's 2 years later, like that's a
yeah.
teeny little piece of time, and look at that, I'm already comprehending so much, I'm moving so much forward. So yeah,
But
just not giving up. Yeah.
that's what's cool too, I think. It's like I don't know, it's funny, like we give up so fast and we limit ourselves so much by these beliefs. Like you said, like, you can keep going and keep trying. And like the only time you're gonna fail is when you believe you failed. That's it. Otherwise you'll succeed. You'll keep going, you'll keep trying until you overcome it, right? It's like if you really look at what stops us from doing things, it's all our own thoughts and our own beliefs about ourselves that are either, stem from our own thinking of ourselves or from, I think more often they stem from outside. They're projections or reflections of what others think of us or society thinks of us or we were taught to think of ourselves. And it limits us and puts us in a box. And we'll constantly, self-sabotage to stay in that box instead of really addressing those fears for what they are, just BS. They're just constructs. You can be whatever you want, So once you realize that, you can break through and see, I think, that you can be anything. It's still going to be hard. There's still going to be difficulties and challenges, but you don't have to interpret them that way. I think this is like the greatest thing from existentialism is that realization that you can reinterpret things however you want. You don't have to buy what other people are selling. You don't have to listen to even your own beliefs in certain cases, right? About how you should interpret it. You can find new ways and new perspectives on it that might make it easier for you to still do what you want and work through it.
Yeah. There's this Gary Vaynerchuk video that I watch every once in a while. I think it's called like advice for 25-year-olds or something like that, but I still use it advice for me, and I'm a couple of years older than that. But
Yeah.
he's like, yeah, he's like the biggest fear I have for you is that you think you made a mistake and now you're behind.
Yeah.
And that's how I felt so often in my life, where like I felt like I made a mistake and now I'm behind. And it's just like once you recognize that you're never behind, you have your whole life to figure this thing out. It just opens up anything, because then maybe it was a mistake, but guess what? You can learn from it and you will get done exactly what you need to get done, exactly when you need to do it.
And what's funny? I think I agree with you totally because I had that same experience where I thought it was a mistake, like what I did in the past, and now I'm stuck and I'll never be able to do anything because, it's too late. And it's such a stupid belief. And it's such a restricting, limiting belief. It confines you to being stuck in that crappy situation. And once you realize that, now things are so much better because now I'm free to do whatever and I still have plenty of time to build instead of like, just staying stuck. But we believe those things and then we're just trapped. Instead of being free to actually create, we're stuck in a world that's been created for us. And the funny thing is, a lot of times I think when we have that feeling, we were following other people's beliefs about what we should do anyway. So it's like that was
Mhm.
my problem, and I know yours too, right? You thought you were doing the right thing based on what everybody told you, and then you feel like it's too late, but it's like, well, wait, it's not too late to live my own life. It's never too late to start, literally, because
Mhm.
it'll always be, at least then I'm living my own life, and it's mine instead of somebody
Mhm.
else's, which is awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Or living their timeline.
Yeah.
Like you hear about this so often nowadays about these 20 something year olds who are all pissed off because they're not a multi-billionaire CEO. It's like one of the things that I like reading is Think and Grow Rich, because it talks about Henry Ford, it talks about Thomas Edison, it talks about all these people who before computers were
Mhm.
literally the most well-known people. They never accomplished anything in their life until at the minimum their 40s.
Wasn't like Edison and stuff, and wasn't he like in debt too a lot because he was constantly making things and like constantly like
Probably,
basically borrowing money to like build this stuff that was failing
probably.
because he failed like hundreds of or thousands of times in some cases, I think, but
Yeah.
stuck with it.
Yeah. Bill Gates was the first millionaire younger than 40.
Yeah, think about that.
Yeah, in the history of the universe. He was the
Yeah,
first one younger than 40. And now it's like, if I'm not a multi-billionaire by the time I'm 23, I'm just going to off myself. And it's like,
yeah,
hang on. Let's get
yeah.
some perspective.
Well, this is it, right? It's perspective, and it's what you believe to be. it's what you believe based on what you're seeing, right? And they see these stories and they think, well, if I'm not that person, I'm a failure and I'll never make it. And that's just stupid. And maybe ask bigger questions. Are you happy? Are you living how you want to live? Is it
Maybe ask
worth it?
bigger questions. Are
Yeah.
these people happy?
Yeah,
Not are they
exactly.
pretending to be happy on Instagram to sell you whatever their product is, but are they
Yeah.
actually happy? Like go meet them and see because
Yeah.
I've every time I've met one of these like guru people, I've been super disappointed because yeah, they might have been great making money,
Yeah.
but the rest of their life is a mess and they're not enjoying it. There are select few who may be, but for the most
Yeah.
part, not
I
enjoying it.
think there's a
Go
there's
meet
a
them.
few who probably did it right, but yeah, I think the rest of them, it's like, and because we forget, we bring ourselves with us wherever we go. So if you're not living, and I think this is what's so crucial about authenticity, that you're living the life that's right for you, you'll be happy wherever you are, and you'll have enough because you see the world differently. And I think that's one of the things, we really that desire to fit in, that desire to be what like everything else is we're sold, it really screws us up. It does, and gives us a lot of bad beliefs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. You have anything else you want to add? So there you have it then. What do we title this? Existentialism and living free. Yes.
Living free.
There you go. Yeah, so hopefully you can live free and get past those limiting beliefs. This is the Existential Stoic podcast. Check us out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Like, share, subscribe, helps us out a lot. We'll be back later this week with a quick fix. Until then, though, later, Andy.
Later, Danny.